This isn't quite a presentation on immigration, as the last few have been on. But so, as a baseball fan, and I did get to dress up for this today, this is the first presentation I've been able to dress up for in college, and the last presentation I'll do in college. So, I know, super sad, I'm crying up here. My presentation is on fan expectations in Major League Baseball and how that impacts the attendance percentage at a given home team's game. So looking at the research question, I kind of set it up with two different scenarios, entirely different scenarios for attendance percentage at a given baseball game. So what we have here is Fenway Park in September of 2003. It's a little bit of a blurry picture, but you can see all the seats are filled with fans. September of 2003, so attendance percentage is at 100%. On the right side of the screen, we'll get Marlins Park in July of 2018. Now, this is in the Miami Marlins home stadium, and you see all of the blue empty seats. There's only about 16% attendance at this given baseball game. So because of this, my research question is going to kind of attack how much do fans' perceptions of a home team impact a given home team's attendance at a given home game during the season. So looking at the motivation for this particular study. Oh, well, actually, let me give you guys a background for baseball. Well, I'll start with who is a baseball fan? Who watches like at least 20 games a year? One. Well, what team? Red Sox?
I'm a Tampa Bay Rays fan.
That's awesome. And I'll talk about them a little bit if you want me to. And who do you root for? Sox, all right. So I'll talk about them a little bit as well, or I'll at least try to. So the background for Major League Baseball. There's 30 teams in any given season with 162 games played per team. And 81 home games played per team. So we're really concerned about the home games rather than the away games as well. There are two different leagues, which is broken up there: the American League and the National League, with 3 different divisions and 5 teams per division in those divisions in the leagues. 10 teams make the playoffs each year. This is a little bit of a new thing where 8 teams used to make the playoffs before 2012. So the top team in each division makes the playoff, and then the 2 top teams from each division or each league, the American League and the National League, make the playoffs. From there, there's one team that's crowned the World Series champion. This most recent year was the Washington Nationals, which as a Phillies fan I'm pretty pissed off about, but I will continue on to the motivation for the study. So I'll give it a background information with fan expectations about how I formed them and how that kind of forms economic theory behind what my dependent variables will have, or independent variables will have on the dependent variable of attendance percentage. So I love the Philadelphia Phillies. And I have since 2008, which is when they won the World Series. One of a really good day in my childhood. In 2008, they went to the World Series. The next year in 2009, lost to the Yankees. Very bad day in my childhood. But 2010 and 2011, they had the best record in the National League, and 2011 was actually the last time that they made the playoffs. So because of this, we look at the fan attendance percentage. This is Citizens Bank Park, beautiful baseball park in Philadelphia. Their home stadium had attendance percentage for each game near 100% of the maximum capacity of that given stadium. So overall, you can tell that season over season expectations that fans were forming based on performance of the Philadelphia Phillies during that time was having a positive impact on the attendance percentage of that stadium for those given years. Now, the last 8 years have been more depressing. So 2012 to 2018, steadily declining performance. Like I said, this 2011 MLB playoffs is the last time the Phillies made the playoffs. So it's pretty upsetting for me. But 2015, they were the worst team in baseball. Year over year, essentially, their winning percentage was the lowest of any other team in baseball. Wait till next year, the Phillies tear it down in 2015. And as a result, this is attendance percentage at a September baseball game that the Phillies played. At the end of the 2015 season, where attendance percentage was around 20% for a team that previously, only 4 years in the past, was booming with their attendance percentage at their given games. So one failure, I'll say, of the study right now is that attendance is measured by purchase tickets and not by total attendance at the stadium, which is the only way to measure attendance without going in with a ticker and asking for every single team for how many people actually walked into the stadium that day. So while this attendance percentage is around 20% of purchase tickets, it's actually closer to around 4% of actual seats sat in during the game versus the entire stadium. So with that background, there are season over season expectations that fans get to form, and then there are in-season expectations that fans get to form. So the Phillies signed what was at the time the largest contract to a single MLB player at the beginning of the 2019 season to Bryce Harper. This was a 13-year, $330 million contract. And that's from Bleacher Report when it broke on March 1st of this year. And because of this, you see these predictions. At the beginning of the year, the Philadelphia Phillies were predicted to, Bryce Harper was supposed to lead them to glory this year, a few months ago, to have won the World Series. Now, you see that, that given expectation from that, off-season having 100% attendance at the first game of the year. Now, what actually happened, I don't have to get into the semantics of why, but their performance was awful compared to what expectations had been formed of over the prior year, right? So, in season, the team's performance game over the last 10 games was not nearly as good as what fans were expecting. And as a result, what started happening towards the end of the season, despite the fact that this team came into the year with pretty high expectations, attendance percentage had dropped below 50% for the stadium. And that's actually a game against the Red Sox. So this is my motivation for the study. Essentially, how do fans form expectations for their baseball team in any given year, and how does that impact the attendance at the next home game for that given home team, right? So here are theories behind the variables and how they'll impact the dependent variable of attendance percentage at a given stadium. So red highlights are negative impacts on attendance percentage, green highlights are positive impacts. So I'll start with the rank because this is kind of backwards. It seems like it would be the opposite direction, but it's correct that it's in this direction. So how did the team rank in its division last year? If the team ranked in first, it came in, it's the highest in their given 5-team division. If they came in fifth, they were last. So as their rank increases in the division, they're coming in a worse place. So you'd expect the rank from the previous year to have a negative impact on every single home game in the next year, right? Did the team make the playoffs last year, and did they win the World Series last year? Those are both dummy variables, 1 if they did, 0 if they didn't. And because of that, you'd expect every home game over the next year to have a positive impact on attendance percentage for a given team. And then finally, what was the team's winning percentage last year? That's a way of forming season over season expectations, saying, okay, if winning percentage was higher last year than another team, you'd expect attendance at every single home game over the next year to be higher as a result. And then the in-season expectation variable took a little bit of time to actually create, but what was the team's winning percentage, the home team's winning percentage that is, over the past 10 games? So the importance of that is over a season, a team's performance changes. The Phillies last year, at the beginning of 2019, were winning around 65 to 70% of their previous 10 games, while towards the end of the year, it was more like 30 to 40%, which obviously had a negative impact on attendance. So as winning percentage over the past 10 games increases, we'd expect attendance percentage to increase as well. So previous literature did help me in terms of forming the actual ability to create this study. So determinants of minor league baseball attendance, that's not really groundbreaking stuff, but there's a positive correlation between winning percentage and expected total attendance. That's from Gitter and Rhodes from 2010. So that kind of goes into the previous season winning percentage variable and the theory behind that. An analysis of Major League Baseball attendance was first done by Knoll in 1974, and he kind of brought in more quantitative variables about city characteristics like disposable income, city population, things like this. That regression was kind of redone by Bade and Tien in 1990 for a larger data set because Knoll had only done it on, I think, a single season, which was less than 1,000 data points. So because of that, Bade and Tien actually found games behind first place was significant at the 1% level, which is a good way of gauging fan expectations for the team as well, because as games behind first increases, you'd expect attendance percentage to decrease as well. So they also account for the stadium capacity by including number of seats in the regression, which is a little bit different from what I do. I account for that by doing attendance percentage as the dependent variable rather than total attendance as the dependent variable. Now finally, Major League Baseball attendance with a long-term analysis using factor models by Ahn and Lee. They found that the determinants of attendance change over time, which actually has a pretty big impact on this study as well. 1904 to 1957, they found that state and city-specific variables had a larger impact on any given home team's attendance. So things like disposable income, things like population, things like average race in the city, different races in the city had a bigger impact. What has a bigger impact nowadays is what's actually happening in the baseball game. So things like outcome uncertainty with, if there's a team that's really good playing another team that's really good, you'd expect that attendance to be higher. The quality of the stadiums, the size of the stadiums, and playing styles. What Ahn and Lee actually did is they took average home runs that the home team was hitting per game as a way of accounting for playing styles. So that's pretty important in my study because going into the data, I'm looking at the last 18 years of available baseball data. So we have game level data. It's a panel data set as a result. Attendance per game, the stadium played in, maximum capacity for that stadium is how I create the dependent variable of attendance percentage, winning percentage over the last 10 games for the home team, and then seasonal level data is something that I got from another data source, which is the divisional rank that I described earlier. If they won the playoffs or the World Series last year as a dummy variable, and a total winning percentage for the previous year as a dummy variable. So taking these all into account, there are about 43,740 data points. Some of those had to be scrubbed out because there wasn't really, not the data source wasn't reliable, but it had some empty values, so I think it was around 43,000 variables that I had all good, ready to go. And then season level data only had 540 unique data points because you can imagine every single home game that the Phillies played in 2008, their winning percentage last year will be the same. So that's why that has fewer data points for seasonal level data. Now, methodology in terms of the regression. So your attendance percentage, attendance at the game divided by maximum capacity of the stadium. And that takes into account, Fenway is only 35,000 maximum capacity, while in Oakland, I think they have like 65,000 maximum capacity. So that's a way to kind of account for that there. The independent variables of interest that actually measure fan expectations are home team win percentage over the last 10 games for in-season expectations, and then these three right here that we've been talking, or these four right here that we've been talking about a lot for season over season expectation formations. And then the additional independent variables that I use to kind of control for more variation within the data set include visiting team dummies. So for example, fans in Boston and fans in New York travel really well to away games. So, if the Yankees are playing the Marlins in Miami, you'd expect the attendance to be higher at that game because it's the Yankees playing the Marlins, not because the Marlins have done anything great. And then home team dummies does the same thing. So I'm sorry about the Rays, but the Rays always have really low attendance. I don't know what it is in Tampa, but they had a really good team last year too. But their home team attendance is just always consistently low. The Marlins are another example of that. The Athletics are another example of that. So that accounts for variation in just consistently low attendance for certain teams. Day of the week, you'd expect, Friday games to have more attendance than midweek games. Year dummies, one of the reasons that I account for that is attendance in baseball has kind of been on a steady decline over the last few years at the very least. And then log of maximum attendance, the reason that's included is that you'd expect attendance percentages at a huge stadium like Oakland, as I described earlier, to be lower just as, as a function of that stadium than they are in a smaller stadium like Fenway. So looking at the actual model itself and the variables that we care about on the left-hand side of the screen over there. So what we have is a negative impact on rank. So as your place in the division increases last year, meaning you place lower, your attendance percentage is expected to drop by negative 0.00%, 0.007%. Playoffs and World Series last year has a 2 percentage point increase in a given expected attendance at a home game, all else equal. Winning percentage last year, so the way that I actually calculated that variable, instead of it being 0.50, it's multiplied by 100, and the reason for that is the interpretation of the variable becomes much easier. So what this says is that if a team's winning percentage last year increases by 1%, so that is really they just win an additional game. It's not exactly 1% if they win an additional game because it's not a nice divisible number, but we'll say if it increases by exactly 1%, attendance percentage at a given home game for that stadium all of next year will increase by 0.0064%. Now that seems low, but on the accord for the number of fans, when you take average maximum capacity into account, that's around 285 fans that come to the game just because the team won an additional 1 percentage point of games last year. And then this one right here, winning percentage over the last 10 games, that's also multiplied by 100, as kind of shows in the chart right there. But at the same time, that variable can only change by 10 percentage points at any given time. So you either win 50% of the last games, or then if you win an additional, it's 60%. So imagine that this 9 is right here, 0.0094. So if winning percentage of the last 10 games increases by 10%, attendance percentage at a given home game will increase by 0.0094%, holding all else equal, which is around an additional 414 fans, which I thought was pretty impressive for the actual measure of in-season expectations for this team. And then this last one right here, the log of maximum attendance, while that isn't an expectation variable, I thought it was important to include. Essentially, when the maximum attendance of a stadium increases by 100%, expected fan attendance at a given home game decreases by 15%, all else equal. And then what we see here as well is that all the expectation variables are significant at 1%. The first three variables, since they only had 540 unique data points, have lower T statistics than the last variable, winning percentage of the last 10 games, because that had around 43,000 unique statistics there. So results and conclusions. To start, it uses linear regression to show the importance of expectations on fan attendance at any given home game for any given team in any given season. All these variables are significant as well, which shows that how the team is performing impacts the fans' expectations, which then, of course, impacts home team stadium attendance percentages. And then these results are important for teams to take into account when planning new investments, improvements, and then fan promotions is a fun one too. So essentially, if I like bobblehead nights and things like this, teams can kind of think about this on two sides of the coin. So if a team has been performing better over the last 10 games than maybe expected over previous 10 games, right? You might want to do a fan promotion to kind of increase morale of the team and get more people sucked into the team for that given year. Or on the other side of the coin, if the team is doing really poorly over the last 10 games, like if they have a 10-game losing streak, you might say, okay, we should do a fan promotion because of the fact that no one's going to come to the game because of the team. They're going to come to the game because of the free shitty bobblehead. So overall, further research can kind of create improvements for the proxies for these fan expectations by actually talking to the fans themselves. So I know sports radio stations do like Twitter polls and things like this, so you can look at, the kind of percentage, like, do you believe the Red Sox will win the World Series this year, yes or no? At the beginning of the year, 80% say yes, 20% say no, versus the end of the year, depending on when it was, 20% say yes, 80% say no. So the change in that could have a pretty significant impact on attendance percentage that you look at through the year. And then another one that I think would be really interesting to add on to the study is the change in betting odds during a given year. Because at the beginning of the Phillies season, for this season, for example, they were predicted to win 89 games. Well, then the middle of the season, they were only predicted to win 81 games. So that change, that negative change in expectations, seeing if that also has a negative impact on fan attendance as well. Overall, kind of just building those in-season expectation variables compared to the season-over-season expectation variables, which were pretty robust. So I'll leave you guys with this guy. That's the Philly Fanatic. That's their mascot. He's a kind of a freak of nature. But he's really fun. There's good videos of him. He has like a big stomach and stuff like that. But thank you. I appreciate it.